Tonight we're going to look at a pair of them, another pair, pride and vainglory, or pride and vanity, I suppose. These are, some of them, as with gluttony and greed, sound almost as if they're the same, the way we use these words in ordinary language. But the fact that they sound similar, but they are different, reflects the very fine, subtle psychology and thinking that went into the definition of these states of mind. Each of these faults, and it's a better word perhaps, or obstacles, better than the word sin, really, each of them reflects our human propensity for evil, because in any one of these, taken to excess, we can become totally dehumanized. We could become totally obsessed, compulsive, and wild with anger or with lust or with pride. So they also show, of course, our propensity for making fools of ourselves, for just looking ridiculous in our own eyes and in the eyes of other people. When you meet a very vain person, lots of characters in Charles Dickens, for example, who just become absurd when we see this fault. But they are subtly defined, and we're meant to understand them not only through other people, but of course in ourselves. They're universal. Gluttony and greed, lust, sadness, anger, apatheia, vainglory, and pride. Evagrius, who first defined them, called them logismoi, or thoughts, rather than sins. And this is because they are states of mind that we can't avoid entirely. It's as if human nature has the seeds of these states of mind in itself, and we can't really control the existence of these seeds, these propensities. So we don't have to feel guilty about feeling them. On the other hand, we have to do something about them. Otherwise, we become completely overwhelmed by them, controlled by them. And this attitude challenges some aspects of modern therapeutic thinking. Today, we will say, it's okay to feel what you're feeling. Tell me what you're feeling. And don't feel guilty about feeling like you want to kill your husband. That's okay. You can feel that and express it. But on the other hand, it isn't enough to say it's okay to feel these, to recognize these states of mind. It's certainly necessary to recognize them, to accept that they're there, and to realize that it's not necessarily your fault that you're feeling them. On the other hand, we have to recognize our responsibility. First of all, to ourselves, because these states of mind would destroy our own peace of mind, destroy our integrity, destroy our sanity in the end, if we allowed them uncontrolled expansion. But also, we have a responsibility for others, because in each of these states of mind, we can act very cruelly, insensitively, or viciously towards other people. And the wisdom that we've been looking at from different perspectives, from the desert tradition, and of course from many modern interpreters as well, the wisdom is that we have to identify, recognize, and accept the existence of these seeds, or these states of mind. On the other hand, we have to do something about them. What can we do about them? Well, one of the things we have to learn is to control them. You have to control your anger. You have to control your greed. You have to control your depression, your tendency to give up. You have to control your pride, your vainglory, and your lust. If we don't control them, they control us. And one of the fruits of the Spirit is self-control. In other words, when we do a spiritual work, when we have a practice, meditation was the great therapy for the desert teachers and psychologists and therapists, as they were. Meditation was the supreme therapy. Pure prayer, as they called it, or prayer of the heart, what we've just done together, what many of us do twice a day or more. And this work of prayer, of pure prayer, oratio pura, produces things. It produces the fruits of the Spirit, which counteract these negative and potentially destructive states of mind. The work of meditation, the work of prayer, pure prayer, and they insisted that when they spoke about prayer, they nearly always meant the prayer of the heart, meditation. This is not about repressing or even suppressing these states of mind, but it's actually, although it does control them even superficially, you may begin your meditation feeling like killing your husband. At the end of the meditation, the anger has subsided if you've done the work as best you can. We can only do it as well as we can, but if you do it as well as you can, almost certainly that negative state of mind with which you started will be diminished. So it has an immediate effect, this therapeutic work of pure prayer, but it has a deeper significance because it goes to the root of these states of mind. It goes to the seed, the seminary of these states of mind itself. And much of this could perhaps be described in terms of the modern research into the brain, the plasticity of the brain. It was largely thought that the brain didn't change, and the way the brain worked and was made didn't change after childhood. Now it's widely recognized that the plasticity of the brain is with us as long as the brain is, that we can change, and that meditation has a very definite effect upon the brain. The brain is really the sort of the screen or the visible, measurable aspect of this much deeper human mind that we're talking about. But the brain, does give us some indications that something real is and permanent and structural is happening when we do this therapeutic work of meditation. The brain even gets thicker in certain parts of the brain, I think. So, meditation produces these fruits of the Spirit which counteract the potential toxicity of these faults, of these obstacles, of these states of mind. And as the work of meditation on a regular basis produces these fruits and gets to work on these states of mind, we don't have them all at the same time, and we all have perhaps certain states of mind, certain faults that we are more prone to, maybe at different stages of our lives as well. But as meditation gets to work and begins this process of conversion, or this process of metanoia, which was the word that Jesus, or in the gospel that Jesus uses to describe repentance, or a change of mind, plasticity of mind, you might say, that as meditation begins to do this work, we become capable of of deeper insight and more subtle insight into these very conditions that we're dealing with. We begin to grow, in other words, in self-control, self-management, and that arises from a spiritual quality or effect that we call self-knowledge, spiritual self-knowledge. Not just a psychological self-awareness, which is also necessary, because we need to be able to recognize our patterns. You know, that person always makes me react in this way, or whenever I see that object of desire, it has that effect upon me. Or whenever I get a disappointment, I always relapse into total self-rejection. So we recognize over the years the patterns of mind that we are all subject to. But there's a deeper self-knowledge than that, which meditation opens us up to, which is not really cognitive knowledge in the sense of knowing something objectively or knowing about ourselves. It's much more experiential and direct. It's actually knowing ourselves. It's knowledge of the self rather than knowledge about the self. So this is much more difficult to objectify or write about, but we know it because of its effect. It has a very powerful effect. As this experience of self-knowledge is developed and grows, it changes us. That's why we notice changes and why other people notice changes in ourselves. Somebody says, "Oh, you're easier to live with than you were a year ago." And you wonder why they say that. And you think, "Oh yes, that's actually true. I'm less judgmental, I'm less reactive, I'm less distracted." So this necessary this necessary psychological awareness that gives us the ability to recognize these states of mind, because we have to recognize them before we can control them. But this knowledge about ourselves arises from a knowledge of ourselves. And that's why, as we'll see later, pure prayer is the root of dealing with these problems. Evagrius, a great father and theorist of the desert, says that everyone must be watchful of his actions unless he labors in vain. We have to learn to watch our thoughts, he says. To gain experience in the monastic art, let him keep watch over his thoughts. Let him observe them Let him observe their intensity, their periods of decline, and follow them as they rise and fall. Let him note well the complexity of his thoughts and their periodicity, the demons which cause them, with the order of their succession and the nature of their association. Then let him ask from Christ the explanation of the data he has observed. So he's asking quite a lot of us, not just to be able to say what mood you're in, or say, yes, I do feel very angry today, but actually he's asking a much more complete report, ability to observe how these states of mind arise, how they relate to each other, how they succeed each other, and how often, and how they associate with each other. But then, the meaning of this data, this self-observation, doesn't come from ourselves. It comes from Christ, from the mind of Christ. And this understanding or this explanation is gnosis. This is the wisdom or the spiritual knowledge that arises from the deeper work of meditation. But we have to watch our thoughts. The focus of the Desert Fathers and Mothers was the training of the mind and the heart, what we call spiritual development. That's what he calls here the monastic art. And we'll come back to this in contemporary terms. But they saw and well understood the fact that you could develop quite strongly your powers of self-control, and quite strongly you could develop your subtle understanding of these states of mind, and yet still fall victim to pride and vainglory. The work or the monastic art he's talking about, which is the art we practice in meditation, if we allow meditation to shape our lifestyle, if we see meditation merely as a technique that we're adding on or adding into our sort of recipe for life, then we may not experience this so clearly. But if we do allow the meditation to become part of our life, then of course it begins to shape the values and the insights and our perception of the meaning of our lives. This is a little different from the modern idea of self-fulfillment, but it's or human development, but it's very close. So the great danger is that we might develop these skills, as it were, and then become rather proud about being able to control these states of mind and being able to observe our states of mind and have deep psychological insight into ourselves. So there's a little story from Abba Antony, one of the father of the desert. He said 9 monks, it's quite a large number, 9 monks fell away after many labors and were observed with spiritual pride, for they put their trust in their own works and did not give due heed to the commandment, ask your father and he will tell you. So what's he saying here? He's saying here, this is your spiritual father, or he's saying here that however much progress we may seem to make in self-control and self-awareness, we can trip ourselves up fatally in terms of the spiritual journey by relying upon our own works, self-sufficiency. And the insurance against this is that we have others in our lives. This is the fundamental insurance we need against pride. I'll talk about the distinction between pride and vainglory a little bit later, but they're close enough in a way to talk about as one at the moment. So our insurance policy against doing all this good work and then making a fool of ourselves by falling into self-satisfaction, complacency, or even spiritual pride, is that we have another or others in our lives with whom we can be completely open. We need that otherness. It's interesting that this insistence of the Desert Fathers on the need for this relationship in their spiritual quest should take place, should be so strongly emphasized in their world of solitude. And yet, our own experience actually would bear this out. In meditation, we go into the desert. The cell is the cell of our heart. I can't meditate for you, you can't meditate for me, so this is a solitary practice, which means one that we have to perform and take full responsibility for ourselves. And this is the real meaning of solitude, that we recognize and accept the uniqueness of our own identity and of our own way of living out these truths. We all live them out, but we live them out in utterly unique ways because of our ontological uniqueness. So it's precisely because of this solitude and this the recognition and acceptance of our uniqueness that we are capable of this kind of profound relationship. If we weren't capable of solitude, we wouldn't be capable of this kind of relationship in which we can be fully open. And happy is the person who's found it. This idea of friendship, fundamentally, it's about friendship, not authority. This idea of spiritual friendship goes back, of course, to the dawn of Western philosophy. The Greek philosophers who said, a life without a friend is not worth living. So I think the Desert Fathers, in their own way, have understood this. They've recognized the fundamental importance of openness, and that is humility, the cure for pride. We need another and others in our lives. And also having that connection, having that friendship, in many ways it's what it means to say we meditate in community, avoids competitiveness. The danger of the desert monks, especially because they were sort of professional ascetics, was that they began to compete with each other. That was their pride. Might seem a bit absurd to us, how many or how few grapes you ate a week, or how little water you ate, or how little sleep you had compared with others. It is a little absurd, but so would perhaps market trading seem absurd to them. So we all find some way of making fools of ourselves. But their way of avoiding this competitiveness within the ascetical life was this relationship, the friendship, or the teacher. The cell and the teacher work together. Go to your cell, and your cell will teach you everything the teacher will say. The teacher says that with an authority of friendship and personal experience that encourages and reinforces the commitment of the student to go back and take up meditation again. And in a similar way, I think the meditation group performs this function at one level. The work that is done in the cell is this work of interior stillness, or hesychia, the Greek word for interior stillness. Interior stillness is the energy that gets to work on the roots. It's the sort of the radiotherapy that gets to work on the roots of these faults, of these thoughts, these states of mind, these sins. In interior stillness, Valgrius says, we are detached from the remembrance of wrongs suffered and pride of spirit. How often we fall into pride because of our victimhood, which gives us a superiority over the person who oppressed us. It's a kind of self-defense almost. Such peace, he says, this Hezekiah, develops all the virtues, all the things we need to counteract these faults are developed through the work of Hezekiah. It will also help you to remember your mortality, to keep death always before your eyes. One very good way of humbling yourself, getting things back in proportion, getting yourself grounded again, and to be watchful over your soul, to be able to watch and discriminate the stream of memories, desires, and fears that flow through our mind and through our emotions at any one moment. That first stream of distraction that we run into as soon as, whenever, at the beginning of every meditation. These logismoi, or thoughts, in particular, surface in solitude. That's why they went out into the desert. Precisely because it's solitude that, and a lack of external distraction, such as we try to practice in meditation, allows these thoughts to come to the surface. And when they come to the surface, you can work on them. You can't work on them as long as they remain unconscious. They work also, of course, on this particular and most subtle danger, the danger of self-satisfaction, pride, vainglory. Vainglory is different from pride. Pride is a sense of our own superiority. That sort of arrogant sense that, or that we cling to or manufacture, that we are inherently better, wiser, or intelligent, more discerning than other people. Vainglory, on the other hand, is the thirst for fame and recognition. So they're rather similar to the difference between gluttony and greed. Greed is the desire to acquire as much as possible, everything, ultimately, whereas gluttony is the actual attempt to stuff yourself with everything. I think perhaps the term that captures this word vainglory today is narcissism. We live in a culture of public intimacy. People love to go on TV, very popular TV programs in which couples come out in front of a TV audience and then in front of a studio audience and then in front of millions of people and speak about, their most personal aspects of their lives. Whether it's out of revenge or whether it's out of desperation, whatever the motivation is, or whether they're being paid to do it, I don't know. But we thrive on that, the Big Brother sort of open, promiscuous intimacy, which isn't really intimate. It isn't really about confidences, because it lacks the personal touch, it lacks the personal framework, which gives those confessions or those confidences true meaning. So why do we do it? Why do we thrive in this culture on that kind of narcissism or that kind of public promiscuous intimacy? I think it must be something to do with the fact that it makes us special, at least for 15 minutes of our fame. That when we confess in public or we share some shame or some scandal in public, we are becoming interesting. We're becoming famous for whatever we're going through. Anyway, I think there's some connection here between the vainglory, which is what you want other people to think highly of you. It's the thirst for celebrity. I mean, narcissism is a feature of a culture of narcissism. That's why we want to be close to celebrities. We sort of absorb some of their fame, or pick up the cigarette butt that they dropped, or these are relics. I think I heard on the news today the piano from Casablanca was sold for $2 million. These are relics now. So anyway, celebrity and public intimacy, or this promiscuous confidence, is kind of related to this need for attention and this thirst for recognition. So things haven't changed that much. Human nature remains what it is. These logismoi, these thoughts, these problems, these states of mind are the same as they always were, and society is still the world. Hasn't changed, essentially. But what has changed, of course, are the terms in which we respond to these challenges and to these difficulties. We don't go, or very few people, even then, went into the desert. But the people who went into the desert to look at them, to look at the desert warriors, and to sit at their feet for a while, and to come home afterwards, were concerned about what they call the monastic art. So what is it for us today? We don't go into the desert. There aren't so many monasteries where this would be possible to do anyway. So what do we do today? How do we deal with these issues of our spiritual liberation and the transformation of mind that we have to go through, we have to take responsibility for? The monastic art, as Evagrius says, begins with keeping watch over your thoughts, observing how they rise and fall. But there's a context in which that happens. The first is solitude. For the desert monks, it was physical solitude. It wasn't isolation, because I was in Cappadocia during the summer and visited some monastic sites from the same period as the Egyptian desert flourished, and it was very interesting to see how the archaeology of the monastic settlements in the deserts of Cappadocia expressed a solitude in community. Some of them lived in small groups, quite close to each other, actually on top of each other really, and there were also more remote cells. And you see that in Buddhist architecture as well. You will often have quite a busy monastery at one level, and then 1,000 feet higher up the mountain there'll be the meditation monastery, or individual, and then higher than that, individual cells. Also at, for example, in some Christian monasteries as well. So solitude is a necessary element of this art that we need to practice. As I said, for us, it may be going to meditate in your room or wherever you can find a quiet place and a quiet time. or in a church on the way to work, or at work at the end of the day's work before you come home. People find the time and space for this solitude. But related to that is community. Evagrius says that community, to some degree, reduces your purity of heart, because there's more distraction, more bother, more unpredictability, because you're living with other people, their moods, their emotions, their personalities. So in some ways, he says, living in community may reduce your purity of heart, your singleness of heart. On the other hand, it pretty powerfully diminishes your tendency to pride. Because if you're living closely with other people, they know you. So your 15 minutes of fame doesn't work in community. Then there are the fundamental monastic vows, which are really expressions of spiritual laws, such as obedience, the capacity for deep listening, and for attuning your own will to that of others, overcoming your basic self-bloody-mindedness and obstinacy and ego, and stability, which means stability in a set of relationships above all, so fidelity, loyalty, and as Benedict adds, conversion of heart, which means a commitment to an ongoing plasticity and a commitment to change. Even when you get to that place where you think, oh, I'm better than I was a year ago, you have to admit, well, that's my starting point now. I've got a long way to go. Ascesis is another element of the art. Ascesis means training, exercise. Essentially, the ascesis of the spiritual life is meditation. That's an exercise we practice, and the training that we commit ourselves to, just as a sportsman or a musician would commit herself to a continuous training program. And then this watchfulness, this habit of being aware as soon as one of these states of mind begins to emerge. Rather like an alcoholic who, forget what the word is they use, but it's the trigger, isn't it? It's the things that trigger. It may be, well, a bottle, I suppose, or a label of a bottle that can trigger the craving. And they become aware of that. So they avoid it, or they catch themselves as soon as the craving begins. So that's an example of the watchfulness, but we apply this to every aspect of all of these potential states of mind. And prayer itself, a single-hearted commitment to the prayer, to the pure prayer. And that this is hard work, because the mind is hard work when the mind is agitated by these passions, by these states, but it's also hard work when you have got yourself into what looks like a peaceful state of mind, and you may feel that you can reduce the intensity of your practice, because you've actually protected yourself. We've got ourselves protected against things that are going to annoy us or intrude upon us. But it's more about self-protection than actually having achieved the tranquil state of mind, or the equanimity that is necessary. The kingdom of heaven, Evagrius says, is attained through tranquility of mind. But tranquility of mind is not a false peace. So it's not a false tranquility that is just maintained by avoiding people or situations that bother you. You have to do the work of facing these people or situations and then, handling them, learning to handle them. The mind may seem calm, but is in fact simply numbed or self-protected. One of the great dangers of any spiritual person or practice is this pax perniciosa, this pernicious peace, this false peace, or this sopor letalis, as Cassian calls it, the lethal sleep, where the mind goes into a kind of I suppose the engine just runs over, but nothing is actually moving. And so we see in Conference 10 of Cassian, the one on meditation, where he actually looks at how to achieve the state of continuous prayer. This is where he introduces the mantra, or the formula, as he calls it. And in this amazing conference, he gives one description after another, quite a detailed description, very vivid, we can all identify with them, of the different states of mind that you pass through when you're meditating, depending on the mood you're in and what particular seed is being germinated in you in the circumstances of your life at that time. Which fault or which state of mind is dominating you? So he describes all these states of mind very clearly, honestly, and then in each of them, at the end of each description, he emphasizes the fidelity to the mantra. This is the ascesis. This is the way to actually wear away the radiotherapy of prayer, sort of wearing away at these little tumors that would otherwise grow. The demon of pride, he says, is the most damaging of all of these faults, because it can look as if you're making progress, but actually what happens is you begin to feel self-sufficient. This is the danger, I think, today of a kind of a self-help spirituality, where we see spirituality as a kind of a series of techniques that we can learn or put together in our own little formula, and we do it ourselves. Well, in one sense, of course, you have to do it yourself, because that's solitude. But it's solitude that has become loneliness or isolation, rather than the solitude that becomes relational and allows us to enter into the gift of spiritual friendship, which the Buddha said is the most important aspect of the spiritual journey. With pride, Evagrius says, it isn't long before you begin to feel angry with other people. And then from that anger comes sadness, another one of the states of mind. Sadness at the loss of connection that has happened because of your anger, which has happened because of your pride. And ultimately, if this goes on unchecked, it leads, he says, to madness. So you have characters like Salieri, you remember in Amadeus, or Nietzsche, I think, probably fell into that pattern as well. It's at this point, actually, it's quite interesting to see another aspect of the vanity or the vainglory that he relates to pride. He says vainglory, this is, remember, my seeking fame and recognition and my narcissism. This leads to bringing the mystery of God down to our own level. So he relates vainglory to being caught trapped in the experience of prayer or understanding of prayer only at the imaginative level. In other words, thinking about God, speaking to God, where God becomes increasingly a projection of my own ego identity. What he calls at the beginning of the 10th conference, the anthropomorphic heresy, turning God into our own image. The ultimate vanity is to do that, because it just it's a false divinity in ourselves. And so the work of coming to equanimity, clarity and balance of mind, is an ongoing work for the desert tradition. Jesus said that told us to set our troubled hearts at rest. That is an invitation to a long process, a long work. It's not just a pat on the shoulder. It's not a false peace. It's not false consolation. But this work of equanimity, that's our daily meditation, produces the great alternative to these troubled, obsessive, compulsive, turbulent states of mind, and that is what they call apatheia. Apatheia, or health of soul, this is where we are free from these passions, these distorted feelings, emotions, and states of mind. And apatheia is not only the freedom from these compulsive, repetitive patterns, but also it is the cure for them. It's the cure, the actual radical cure for the faults themselves, or for the seeds of these faults, so that you would hope, and reasonably, that you would notice with regular meditation that the frequency of these obsessive states of mind, and we all have different patterns, would reduce. You won't get rid of the seeds immediately, but the potency of the seed is going to decrease with regular practice. Apatheia is a clarity of mind which enables you to see which thought you are most inclined to be led astray by, and to nip it in the bud, to stop it before it starts. And he says that the most profound proof of apatheia, this clarity, this calmness, this purity of mind and heart, the most profound proof of apatheia is the ability to drive off vainglory. The signs of apatheia are these: freedom from distraction in prayer. Well, even for a moment. Don't give up. We've all had moments of freedom from distraction. And when the spirit begins to see its own light, this is the self-knowledge I was talking about. And, more psychologically perhaps, when the mind remains in tranquility, in the presence of the images it has in sleep. So you have a nightmare, but you wake up calm. And remains calm as the mind deals with the affairs of life. So as you deal with all the mess and disappointments and stress and everything else that goes on in life that would normally upset you, you can deal with it and recognize it for what it is, But apatheia means that you keep your tranquility in the midst of it. Better than a pill. I mean, we all want that, and so we go and ask for medication to enable us to stay calm in the face of stress or pain. But the argument here is that this apatheia is a natural state which enables us to do that, provided we do the work. This work is, of course, the work of faith, to be distinguished from belief. But faith, which is our capacity for relationship, faithful friends, our capacity for transcendence, because we transcend the temporary cravings or aversions of the ego. We say, no, okay, I'm just going to stay with it. It doesn't matter whether it's a difficult phase, but I'm going to stay with it. So we transcend the ego. It's our capacity, therefore, ultimately for love, because it enables us to maintain our attention on what we have committed ourselves to. We become faithful. And we learn this in the laboratory or in the gym of our meditation. That's where we are really developing this muscle of attention, which is such a fundamental muscle for human living and relationship. And so as we develop it in meditation, it becomes evident that we have this capacity, this art in all aspects and at all times of our lives. And Evagrius says, very interestingly, that faith, which is the energy of this work of transformation, faith exists even in those who do not yet believe in God. So very clearly, the distinction. I hadn't actually read this before I wrote that book called First Sight, which is about the difference between faith and belief. If I did, I've forgotten. I would have put it as the at the head of the book. Faith exists even in those who do not yet believe in God. But we need a practice. That's the bottom line. With pride and vainglory, especially, because these are the most subtle forms of undermining our spiritual development, our human capacities for fulfillment. But in all of these states of mind, in order to control them and to get to the root of them, we need a practice. The effects of keeping the commandments, Evagrius says, do not suffice to heal the soul completely. In other words, it isn't enough just to keep the commandments. That's a sort of a moral basis of life. You know, don't do no evil. But it won't heal the soul. The soul is in need of healing. It's the fundamental humility. They must be complemented, so we do need to keep the commandments, but they must be complemented by a contemplative activity, meditation, which is appropriate to these faculties. And this activity must penetrate the spirit. So it isn't just a psychological work, the work of meditation. Of course it works on your psychology. You're easier to live with. You can control some of your addictions better. But ultimately it has to penetrate in the spirit in this realm of transcendence, which faith leads us to. So our modern culture and our modern psychology are essentially the same as when the 8 principal faults were first defined and analyzed. And we had the same tendency to illusion, to fantasy, to abstraction, and to imbalance, for getting things out of proportion. We're no different from them. The Desert Fathers offer us a spirituality, and means a way of living life as a spiritual journey, not making spirituality part of our life, but making our life spiritual. They offer us a spirituality which is the opposite of abstraction. It's not about business management, but it's about real work. It means solving problems, not bringing in consultants to tell you what the problems are. Sorry if there are any consultants here. No spirituality that avoids the challenges of this real work of the present, or runs away from the truth of our encounter with others on this journey, can be called a spirituality, because it doesn't make our life clearly livable as a spiritual experience, as a spiritual journey. And surprisingly, perhaps, or maybe not so surprisingly, the desert teaches with this profound insight that comes from their own observation of their own minds and the observation of other people that they lived with, no doubt, and spoke with, and that gave us this first rather beautiful and simple system of understanding our challenges, understanding our problems, simple and yet profound, that the desert masters who gave us this system so early in our tradition believed that our life and death lie with our neighbor, as one of them described it. That the deeper we go into solitude, the more we realize that our life and death lie with our neighbor. Sometimes when you read them, it might seem as if they're on some kind of individual hike or, pilgrimage or some individual, sailing around the world alone type of exercise. But in fact, they were conscious of being involved in a race and of having a goal and of needing the means, all the means possible to achieve that goal. But it was not, as we assume today, in a mindset of competition. They were not competitive. That would be the fatal and final sort of flaw that would sink the boat anyway, of pride. So they understood that we are in this race or this journey towards a goal, but not in terms of competition, but in terms of connection. And that's, I think, the great human as well as great Christian insight that comes from these teachers that we've been looking at over the last few months, that we cannot love God unless we love those we can see and those we try to live with.